We have two witnesses for the first hour from 3:30 to 4:30. Wendy Cukier, President of Coalition for Gun Control, and a familiar witness before this committee. And Frederick Priestley Wright, coming in from Edmonton via video conference. Welcome to you both. Just before I ask Ms. Cukier to give her testimony, my intention in terms of ordering this 2 hours is to go through the first hour in a normal fashion, suspend for about 5 minutes, go to committee business, and I'm thinking it should be, frankly, in camera, the committee business, and then hear the second hour worth of testimony. So I'm assuming that's an agreeable way to order our busy affairs here. So with that, Ms. Cukier, welcome once again to the committee. 10 minutes, please.
Thanks very much for including me. And I apologize for not submitting a written brief, but time did not allow us to pull it together and get it translated. So we're happy to provide a written, some of the backup to arguments that I'm going to be presenting today. I wanted to just quickly touch on the issues of firearm gun death and injury in rural communities, and why the Coalition for Gun Control thinks this is something that needs to be addressed, some of the data, some of the solutions. So as many of you around the committee have heard, there's a lot of talk about problems of urban violence and a lot of focus on issues related to gangs in the cities. The irony is, of course, as you have probably heard from previous witnesses, that rates per 100,000 of violent crime, particularly involving firearms, are actually higher in rural communities. And in fact, if you look at victims of police-reported firearm-related violent crime by province, territory, broken down by urban and rural areas, you see that in spite of all the attention that's focused on places like Toronto, the Yukon, Northwest Territories, Nunavut, and so on are much, much higher than the Canadian average. And Manitoba, Saskatchewan, and Alberta have twice the rates of firearm-related violent crime as Ontario does. We also know from reports that have come recently from Stats Canada that while approximately 17% of Canadians are in rural communities and policed by police there, and while about 18% of property crime, i.e. theft of automobiles and so on, occurs in rural communities, meaning it's roughly proportionate to the population and not significantly higher than in urban centers, we see 25% of violent crime occurring in those very communities. And for those of you who have looked at issues like domestic violence, you will know that rural communities have much higher rates per 100,000 of domestic violence incidents, including firearms in particular, than large cities. And if you look at specific phenomena like the murders of police officers, for example, very few, in fact, are killed, particularly with guns in large urban centers. The vast majority are killed in the line of duty in smaller communities, again, in part because of the prevalence of firearms. And the same thing is true if we look at suicide. Why would we talk about suicide in a discussion focused on rural crime? We would talk about suicide in this context because if you take a public health perspective on violence, violence against the self is considered a form of violence. And if you look at the factors which influence suicide rates, if you look at the root causes and so on, the risk of suicide and the risk of homicide, particularly among young men, are very similar. So the same kinds of factors inequality, exclusion, mental health issues, substance abuse, and critical events in the life cycle can precipitate suicide or homicide. And many of you are familiar with, for example, suicide by cop and other phenomena that show this to be the case, or domestic violence incidents, which, when firearms are involved, end half the time in suicide. So the links between suicide and homicide are particularly interwoven when we look at rural communities. And that's why when we think about how to prevent violence framed in a public health model, we look first at the root causes. We look at what the precipitating factors are that lead people to engage in criminal or violent acts. And we know that that gender is a factor. We know, as I said, inequality, lack of opportunity, mental health issues, and so on. Substance abuse, addictions are certainly things that have to be addressed at a community level. We also know from both public health and criminology literature that access to means plays a big role. And that can mean access to the keys to an automobile. For instance, if people do not lock their cars, they're more likely to be stolen than if they lock their cars, or if there are anti-theft devices in place, or if there are video surveillance tools. But it also means access to firearms increases the lethality of violent encounters. So guns don't cause violence or crime, but they make it more likely that it will end in dead people. And then finally, the third dimension that we look at are the responses after the fact, which can really affect the severity of the consequences. And we know that in rural communities, access to emergency response services, whether it's firefighters, police, or ambulances, are reduced, and the time to respond is longer. We know that in rural communities there's less access to things like shelters and other kinds of supports that have been shown to reduce the likelihood that women will be killed, for example. We know that mental health supports are much less readily available in rural communities. There are huge lineups even in large centers, but it gets worse and worse the farther and more removed you are. And support for victims to prevent re-victimization is also lessened. So I want to start by saying that it's important to look at all of those issues when we're trying to come up with a solution. And the final point, which is a bit self-interested, but I think needs to be said, is that we also know that increasingly a large proportion of firearms recovered in crime are sourced from domestic firearms owners. And this is not just true in Toronto or in the recent study that was conducted in British Columbia, but also in smaller communities. We've seen reports from police. So that the availability of firearms in smaller communities can not only increase lethal violence in those communities, particularly when appropriate controls are not in place, but it can also fuel violence in other places. And I'm not sure if MP de Bruzen is there or not, but certainly when it came to the Danforth shooting, it appears the gun was stolen from somewhere in Saskatchewan. So from our perspective, in the context of a crime prevention strategy, whether we're looking at urban or rural communities, we need to consider reducing access to firearms for dangerous people. And certainly we have many cases of small communities where this has been reinforced. We have, for example, Judge Marlene Graham, who ruled that in the investigation associated with the death of Corey Lewis in Okotoks that a big problem was the lack of screening around firearms. We have lots of evidence that shows that controls on firearms reduce lethality. We know that firearms have a gender dimension, and a study that was done in New Brunswick, for example, showed that a quarter of women living with firearms in that community, of those, 66% said knowing firearms were present made them more fearful for their safety and well-being. They said it affected their decision on whether to tell others or seek help for abuse that they received. And so we have to recognize there is a need in rural communities as in urban centers to break the code of silence around domestic violence. And I wanted to end simply by saying that we know that firearms serve legitimate purposes, particularly in rural communities. We have to respect hunting, pest controls, and Indigenous rights, but that doesn't mean that we shouldn't have rigorous controls. It certainly doesn't mean that we shouldn't be considering a ban on handguns and assault weapons, which don't serve a useful purpose in rural communities any more than in urban communities. And we really have to fight the highly gendered notion that having more guns make us safer, because in fact, having more guns in people's homes often makes them more at risk. And I want to quote from Barbara Frey, the UN Special Rapporteur on Human Rights, who said, while male-dominated societies often justify arms possession through the alleged need to protect vulnerable women, women actually face greater danger of violence when their families and communities are armed. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. I'll have to leave it there. Mr. Priestley-Wright, 10 minutes, please.
Thank you very much. Good afternoon to everybody. My name is Fred Priestley-Wright. I'm 83 years old. I live in rural West Central Alberta. I am a professional. I'm an aeronautical engineer by profession, worked as an aerodynamicist on the Avro Aero and then under contract to the U.S. Air Force doing aerodynamic analysis of some of their aircraft. That contract was up in 3 years, and I returned to Alberta, worked in the oil and gas industry, and then went ranching, where I presently live. My incident occurred on November the 4th, and I'll just go through it quickly, I hope. I'd finished lunch. It was minus 20-degree day, some snow. I worked in the office all morning. I was going to my small sawmill after lunch to saw logs, make lumber. I went out to my shop, which is 162 feet from my house. I started my truck. It was minus 20. I left it running. Yes, the keys were in it. Yes, that is theoretically a no-no. In reality, we all do it for very good reasons. I'd forgot my cell phone, so I went back to the house 162 feet. The cell phone was on a shelf and just inside the door. I picked it up. I went back. There was a strange white truck in my yard. I hadn't seen it before. My truck was leaving the driveway to leave the premises. I looked at the truck. It wasn't a local truck. Nobody was playing games. I took my cell phone out and started to phone 911, and my truck reappeared across the lawn and almost ran me down, stopped beside the white truck. The passenger got out and was retrieving something from the white truck that they had left, which turned out to be stolen. I went to the driver's side and I opened the door and I said, "What is going on?" The driver put it in gear, backed up, and the door was open, knocked me down, and then closed and locked the door. So I went to the other side, to the passenger side, where the individual was removing whatever it was from the white truck, the stolen truck, and I asked him the same question: "What is going on?" He grabbed me, and the other fellow got me from behind, and they put me down. And when they were putting me down, they said, we're scared. The RCMP are after us, and the mafia is after us. And right away, I thought, we've got I'm facing a drug case here. They put me down on the ground. The driver got back in the truck. My guard dog chased him back in the truck. The other one cut my throat, kicked my head continuously. I would suggest, if I can guess properly, about 6 times. The first kick was to my right eye, damaged it severely. There were several kicks to my jaw, which did significant damage to my jaw. Another 1 or 2 were to my neck, and I have a neck problem now. And then finally kicked me in the chest, causing excruciating pain. All the time that he was doing this, he was waving a knife in front of me. So I guess I more or less passed out from the extreme pain from the kick to the chest. And I just barely remember him nudging me with his foot like a hunter would do with a deer to see if he was dead or not. And then he proceeded to get into the truck. He was taking his time about it. My wife had come out because she had heard a commotion, and from the corner of the garage said, "What is going on?" Then they both hurried up and left the area. She phoned 911, and the RCMP appeared, and they called an ambulance and whatnot. And what has happened to me? I'm just going to read some of my impact statements to the court. The physical trauma, knife slash to the neck, was a clean cut and bled heavily. Right eye damage, sight is seriously distorted. Can't read a book without frustration due to horizontal double vision. I have to read with one eye closed now. Not hard for an 83-year-old who's used both eyes for most of his life. Serious jaw fractures. I have no feeling to my lower lip and right side of my face due to significant nerve damage. I can't chew properly. Food falls out of my mouth when I eat because of the numbness of my lip and face. During the healing process, my jaws were wired shut for 4 weeks. I required considerable dental work, teeth had to be removed, etc. The pain in my neck will never go away. I was close to dying, I guess. But since that time, this happened on November the 4th. October 31st, I had finished 18 or 20 years as a municipal councillor in the 4th largest rural municipality in Alberta. I was euphoric. I had no more responsibilities. I had time to work on my bucket list, so to speak. November the 4th, this accident or intrusion or whatever you want to call it happened. That took care of my bucket list. Now, at this point in time, as of today, the knife slash has healed satisfactory. Right eye is permanently damaged. I have to close my right eye in order to read. And I'm an avid reader, and I can't do that anymore. Jaw fractures have healed more or less okay. Excuse me. The right side of my face is partially distorted, but is obviously, especially to me, every time I look in the mirror. It required 4 titanium plates to reconstruct my jaw, 1 on each side and 1 down here. I had 2 jaw fractures. Nerve damage to the right side of my face is not repaired. I'm stuck with this for the rest of my life. And results in terrible eating difficulties. I'm reluctant to eat in public because the food drools down my face and I can't feel it and I can't chew properly. So we don't go out for dinner anymore. The left rotation, pardon me?
Just 2
2
minutes.
minutes?
Yeah,
Okay, fine and dandy. My problem right now is the mental trauma. I'm having terrible time with PTSD. I've only been able to have 4 sessions since that time with a specialist, and I'm 83 years old, at a loss to rationalize the vindictiveness of this assault, and I'm embarrassed to admit it, but my problems resulting from this incident are so overwhelming that there are times when I wish the assailants would have killed me. I still feel that way. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Priester-Wright. Thank you for sharing that story, and I can't imagine how any of us are not moved by it. We're going to go now to the question rounds. The first questioner is Mr. Picard for 7 minutes, please.
Thank you, merci. Les traductions fonctionnent très bien.
I hope the interpretation is working for both of you. Can you both hear the interpreter? Ms. Souquier? One of the aspects that is an issue in our study is understanding the nature of rural crime. We've heard from the RCMP and from individuals as well as organizations. And one of the problems that we hear about in rural areas is the response time that it takes the RCMP to reach an incident. The response time can take a fairly long time and tends to be long rather than short. We have questions about human resources, about equipment for police officers, but we understand that police intervention only occurs after the crime has occurred, of course. Now, you mentioned that in the 3 prairie provinces, the crime rate is double. And yet, the resources on the ground are basically only an average, or around the average of the entirety of Canada. And so, the issue from the very beginning, well, what explains that there is a higher crime rate in that region?
I think you will know from the research that it's complex. So you have to look at the root causes, first of all. You have to look at what leads people to criminal behavior. And we heard from Mr. Priestley-Wright, for example, that people who stole his car, his vehicle, appear to have been involved with drugs. They appear to have been, afraid. My guess is they, I don't know what their circumstances were. I don't know if they were caught or not. But if you look at some of the violence involving youth in rural communities, it's not that different than urban communities. If you look at domestic violence, there's a lot of research that explains the causes of domestic violence. I think from my perspective, and I've done some work looking at rural versus urban economic growth, a lot of our resources do go into urban centers. It's also easier sometimes to provide services where people are densely populated. So there are some structural challenges in providing the same level of service, whether we're talking about education, health, policing in communities where people are more spread out. That being said, investing in primary prevention is definitely, without question, the best place to invest. You mentioned policing by the RCMP. I think that police officers in rural communities, whether it's the Sûreté de Québec, whether it's the Ontario Provincial Police, whether it's the RCMP, work it under much more challenging circumstances in some respects than those policing in large urban centres. Large urban centres, typically, for example, they have fewer individual police officers patrolling. Often in smaller communities, the police are spread much thinner. And the fact that so many police officers killed in this country are killed serving Canada in smaller communities, I think is a strong testament of the fact that they themselves are also victimized in violent incidents. The third thing that I think is important, and again, Mr. Priestley-Wright mentioned this, is the kinds of supports that are available in rural communities to victims of violence. And often, I mean, and with respect, he said, I believe he said that he wasn't sure it was worth living, that he sometimes regretted having survived the violent confrontation. That's a tragic but truthful example of what often happens to victims of violence who don't receive the kind of support or justice
Si
that
vous,
they're
si vous
seeking.
permettez, il me reste peu de temps. J'aimerais poser une deuxième.
Sorry, I just don't have much time. So I'd just like to quickly ask Mr. Priestley-Wright a question. Mr. Priestley-Wright, you mentioned that you were a municipal councillor for some time. In the context of your experience, in the environment you lived in, and the context of the township's concerns, did you discuss crime when you were debating things in council?
Definitely. We had presentations from the local detachment of the RCMP almost monthly, giving them statistics, etc. But I'd like to just make a comment here. RCMP response time is considered by some not adequate, but these things happen. What happened to me happened in a matter of seconds. These people came in, they got my truck. I was less than 2 minutes from my back door when they were in, got my truck, and were gone. And all of my neighbors that have had similar experiences with rural crime and whatnot, it's the same thing. They're in, they get what they want, they're gone. The RCMP, you can't even phone 911 in time. It's not, I don't know how. The frustrating part as a councillor, you got complaints all the time about rural crime, rural crime, rural crime. The reality was that those criminals are so knowledgeable that the average person cannot really cope with it.
I'm sorry, Mr. Priestley-Wright. I have to
I'm
stop
sorry.
Mr. Picard there. As you can appreciate, being a councillor at one point, the clock is the enemy of everyone. So I think it's Mr. Iglinski. No, Mr. Palus. Oh, it's Mr. Iglinski.
Thank you, Mr. McKay. I'd like to thank both witnesses for being out here. And I'll start with Mr. Priestley-Wright, but I will start with him by calling him Fred because we've known each other for many years. Fred, shortly after your incident and when you returned from the hospital, there was a rural crime meeting held in a community very close to yours called Pierce, and I believe you were there. And I wonder if you would just advise the group here kind of the sentiment of the people from that group. There was approximately 250 to 300 people there, and they were there because of rural crime. And I wonder if you could kind of just relate quickly as to what the atmosphere was like in that room.
It was, yes, I'll call you Jim. Yes, it was. The atmosphere was not what I thought it was. The people were upset. They weren't upset necessarily at the RCMP or the system or anything else. It was more frustration, I think. For example, people were saying the criminal can come into your home and he has more rights in your home than you do. In other words, if you tried to restrain him, if he was beating your wife and he fell and broke his arm, you could be charged with assault and things of this nature. And this is the reality. And we're told, phone 911, and we know, and we're frustrated, and there was a lot of frustration voiced at that particular meeting that the RCMP just, they can't react fast enough because these criminals are so knowledgeable. Maybe they have a training sessions when they're incarcerated. I don't know, but they certainly know what they're doing, and they certainly have the average citizen. What would you say, at their mercy?
Thank you. And Fred, there's some people that want to make us believe that handguns or weapons are the umbrella over this whole crime wave thing. And I wonder if you would just give us your perspective. If handguns were banned last year, would that have prevented the attack that you experienced? Or do you believe that handguns are a situation in rural Canada?
I don't feel that the handguns are of concern in rural Canada. They definitely are in the cities. In the rural area, people just don't have that many handguns. There's not that many out there. We have the guns for protection. As you know, Jim, where I live and whatnot, when I go from home to my sawmill less than half a mile away, I can see grizzly tracks, I can see cougar tracks, and I'm out there working by myself. The only protection I have is a guard dog and or a rifle. And that's the reality in rural Western Canada.
Okay, thank you. I wonder if how much time have I got, Mr.?
You got, no, but apparently,
You burned up my time.
I'm not burning up your time, it's just that this clock is wrong.
Give me 7 more minutes, Mr. Chair.
Mr.
We'll go with 3 minutes
Okay.
because I'm such a nice fellow.
Fred, would you explain to the committee the judicial experience that you are experienced currently and have been experiencing for quite a long time? The RCMP were able to apprehend the 2 youths, one age 18 and one age 17, within probably a week of the incident, maybe a little less than that. But maybe you can relate to what your experience has been with the courts.
I have spent many hours sitting on hard benches in the Edson courtroom waiting to hear a plea from both of the individuals, waiting and having the situation set down to another court date, et cetera, et cetera. I checked my records. I believe I sat in court 9 different times waiting for something to come of it. October the 1st of this year, we're supposed to have a hearing with respect to the one individual who is not currently in jail. And it is now set over to the 14th of December. And sometimes I hope I got a second. I just want to say this. Our judges, our Crown prosecutors, our defense people, they just, sitting there, I got a feeling that these people were trying hard, but they are just so understaffed that they cannot do their job properly. And as a result, we're seeing situations that I'm experiencing. I don't blame the judge. I don't blame like I say, the Crown prosecutors. It's the system. I'm sorry.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Glinski, and I apologize to you for running the clock poorly.
It's okay.
Madame Moore, 7 minutes, s'il vous plaît.
Merci beaucoup. Pour Monsieur Priestley Wright,
Thank you very much for Mr. Priestley Wright. Now I'm from the north of Quebec, in the Abitibi-Témiscamingue region, in the north near Ontario. In that region, the type of crime you referred to, property crimes, often comes in waves. Young people, teenagers, young adults from the region who commit these types of crimes, and generally they get caught very quickly because someone from the community realizes. Since the beginning of our study, we've been trying to understand why there are statistical differences between the western provinces and the north of Ontario and Quebec. So, to the best of your knowledge and given your experience and what has happened to your neighbors as well as what you've heard in your work as a municipal councillor, does this type of property theft get committed from people from the local villages, or is it urban individuals who come into the rural region to commit these crimes?
The RCMP would probably be the best to give you that information, but it appears to the majority of us that the people that are doing the crime are not from the local area. My case, for example, one I believe was from Edmonton, which is a 2-hour drive from my place. The other was from Grand Cache, which is equally about a 2-hour drive from my place. How they got together, I really don't know. Organized or semi-organized juvenile crime, I suspect. So it's not the local people primarily. And I think the difference being there is that for us, we have more of a road network than you probably do in the area that you're talking about. So it's easier for people to come from outside of the area into our areas, the rural areas.
merci beaucoup. Je demandais pas une
Thank you very much. No, I didn't want to get a specific statistical answer. I just wanted to hear from your experience. So thank you for that great answer. Now, for Ms. Souquier, from the Coalition for Gun Control, I have a question for you as well. You mentioned that there are more police officers who are killed while performing their duties in rural regions. Could that be explained by the type of weapons that are used in rural versus urban regions? When shooting breaks out during a police officer's service, well, often there's just handguns, but in rural regions, we're talking about higher caliber weapons a lot of the time. So there's a limit for bulletproof jackets. So is that why the fatality rates are higher in rural regions, given that there are higher caliber, higher range weapons?
Wendy, I think that that's an interesting explanation, but I don't think it aligns with the evidence, because if that were the explanation, then what you would see is lots of police officers shot in urban centers but not dying, in contrast to police officers being shot in rural areas and dying. And I don't think there's any evidence to support that. The last police officer who was shot and killed in Toronto, for example, was Todd Bayless in about 1995. There have been 3 police officers since then killed in the greater Montreal area. But if you look at the other 20 or 30 that were killed, it's Lac-Simon, it's Edmonton, RCMP, 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 Catavet, OPP, RCMP, RCMP, Saskatchewan, RCMP, Saskatchewan, Windsor, Laval, I would count as part of the Greater Montreal area, RCMP, 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 RCMP. And I think if you look at the geographic breakdown, the explanation is frankly that often police officers go on calls, and in those communities, they're more likely to be going to a home with a firearm. If you look at the circumstances under which police are shot and killed, it's typically not in a shootout with a gang in an urban center. It's typically someone who's disturbed in the midst of a domestic violence incident, someone who's suicidal, or in some cases, for example, in the case of Mayor Thorpe, someone who had a beef against the police. We saw that in Moncton as well.
Ok, j'aurais une autre question.
Now I have another question. When someone has a mental health issue and that they consult a health professional, how often do these individuals who might pose a risk, how often are they referred to the RCMP and the competent authorities in order to undergo an evaluation if necessary? Do health professionals consider referring people who have mental health problems?
And I'm not sure if the committee called Dr. Barbara Kane, who works in Prince George. She's a psychiatrist, and certainly she's somebody who does routinely notify the police when she thinks someone has a mental health problem. But you can look incident by incident. And for example, there have been a number of very terrible cases of domestic violence in particular, where healthcare professionals really didn't understand the risks of allowing individuals with PTSD or suicidal ideation or a history of domestic violence didn't even raise the issue of whether or not they had access to firearms. We know that that's a huge problem in instances of domestic violence, especially over the last 10 years, when the awareness of the risks associated with firearms in the home has really diminished. And I wouldn't for a moment suggest that that firearms don't serve a purpose in rural communities or in Indigenous communities and so on. But if you have a teenager who is showing mental health problems, if you have someone with depression or suicide or who's acting out, having guns in the home is a tremendous risk factor.
Thank you, Dr. Coutier. Ms. Dema, welcome back to the committee.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you to both our witnesses for being here. My question is for you, Wendy. Welcome back, by the way. Last week, two witnesses who appeared before the committee, they were asked to appear by our Conservative colleagues. They called on the government to enhance the provisions of the criminal code around self-defense and property defense so that property owners can act as the first line of defense without fear of prosecution. In this particular case, the individual was charged and later acquitted after he fired warning shots towards trespassers on his rural property. They appeared to be breaking into his car, and a ricocheting bullet hit one of them. In the words of these individuals, quote, "Firearms aren't the problem in Canada, our justice system is the problem." And then they've also said in these communities they would prefer, and again I quote, "shoot, shovel, and shut up," rather than contact the authorities. I'm just wondering what your thoughts are on lessened restrictions on firearms as a solution to property crime.
If arming for self-protection worked, the United States would be the safest country in the world. Last year, they had more than 10,000 firearm murders, which was substantially more than us. Again, I'll reiterate what the data show. The data show that property crime in urban and rural contexts are about the same. What's different is violent crime, and I actually think the availability of firearms in rural areas is part of the problem, not the solution. If you compare the United Kingdom, Canada, the US, and Australia, what you will see is that the rate per 100,000 of murders without guns is roughly the same. But when you enter guns into the mix, you see massive differences. The United Kingdom last year, which has 60 million people, had 27 gun murders. They had just as many stabbings, beatings, stranglings as we did on a per capita basis, but they had 27 gun murders. I think people who are arguing for arming for self-protection may really believe that to be the case. They may be buying into American-style rhetoric, but there is absolutely zero evidence, like zero evidence in the public health or criminology literature that's credible, that suggests that that will make us safer. And I just go back again to what the United Nations has said about the impact on the safety of women. Where there are more guns, you're going to see more dead women, you're going to see more suicides, and you're going to see higher rates of interpersonal violence with firearms. And that evidence is absolutely clear. So I would really urge the committee to recognize that many people who are fearful and frustrated, and I can understand the frustrations with the justice system, may desire to take the law into their own hands. But the Supreme Court of Canada has said repeatedly there is no right to bear arms in Canada, and our laws were designed to not encourage US-style arming for self-protection. I think that will take us down a path of no return. And if people think violent crime is a problem now, more guns will make us far less safe.
Do you actually have the stats comparing Canada and the United States? You mentioned the United States, and you just said Canada was much lower. I'm just curious, do you have the actual statistics?
Yeah, the United States has 10 times as many people as we do. They had 11,004 murders with guns in 2016. We had 223. If they were the same proportion, they would have had around 2,000. So they have substantially higher rates of gun homicide. But if you look at murders without guns, they're about twice as high. So we were 93 per 100,000. They were 1.94. It really reinforces the fact that more guns make us less safe. More guns result in more dead children and more dead women and more dead police officers. So, this pattern is consistent tragically across Canada. If you compare the rates of gun ownership to the rates of gun death and injury in this country, you see those rates of firearm-related violent crime replicated. So the provinces where there are the most guns, there are the highest rates of women killed with guns, the highest rates of suicide. So the evidence is very, very clear on this point.
I wondered also if you would be able to provide us with that list of police officers who had been, you read it off, but I wonder if you could just send that off to the clerk.
Yes, as I said at the outset, I'm happy to provide a written brief, translated and with the data that I'm citing.
Thank you very much. As you know, our study is on rural crime, but so far much of the discussion has focused on property crime, things like trespassing and people breaking into cars. Do you have any information on whether crime involving firearms has increased in recent years in rural areas? And second to that, what about intimate partner violence involving a firearm?
And I'm happy to send that through as well. The Canadian Association of Chiefs of Police reported on that. Stats Canada has reported on that. And while, as I said at the outset, firearm violence in Toronto has received a lot of attention lately because of the feeling that it was random and people were victimized in places that they expected to be safe. The pattern is consistent across the country, and the concerns should be shared in all communities and not just focused in large urban centers.
Okay, well, I'm going to have to leave it there. Thank you, Ms. Demov. Mr. Palus, 5 minutes, s'il vous plaît.
Merci, Monsieur le
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. Currently, I believe that the way our study has got off the ground is not quite right because the issue we're discussing is rural crime. We met with the Maurice family. We met with other witnesses, Mr. Wright, Mr. Priestley Wright today. And we're trying to understand who the perpetrators are and why they commit these crimes, who supports them. In the case of Mr. Priestley Wright, we heard about the vehicle theft. According to you, Mr. Priestley Wright, in Alberta, currently, my colleague Ms. Damoff asked the question, but do you believe that most crimes are committed by some teenagers or like hoodlums or by organized crime when it comes to, for example, auto theft?
I feel that it's organized, maybe not tightly organized, but loosely organized. They all have their connections. Whatever they steal, they have a home for it, so to speak. But I'd like to make one comment, if I may. Most of our petty rural crime in rural areas, I believe, the hoodlums use knives. They don't use guns. And I agree with the comment made earlier that the long rifle deaths and whatnot occur by people with mental problems. I'm trying to think back in all of my years. I would suggest that the majority of the shootings that I have been aware of, it has been by people have shown to be mentally unstable. The petty crime, in other words, I was attacked with knives. Everybody's attacked with knives. I cannot remember an incident of rural crime where the perpetrators used long guns.
Là maintenant, je dois reviser le.
So when this happened to you, you weren't able to call the police. There was a theft. They tried to steal your vehicle. It all happened very quickly. But later, the perpetrators were arrested. And like you said, the legal proceedings have been very lengthy. But you said that one of the individuals is not incarcerated. Do you know why? And also, you mentioned that there was a problem of lack of resources for judges and lawyers. That's something that we need to understand more about at the federal level. We need to understand why there's a lack of resources. Those individuals were arrested. Why are they not incarcerated? They tried to kill you. That's serious. What is happening with the lack of resources?
They are both we're both in remand centers. The one that is incarcerated is in the federal prison system. The other one has pleaded not guilty. So I'm sorry, I'm not familiar with all of this terminology that we're being used with. Now, why I think that they're in my observations after sitting through probably 9 court hearings type of thing, that I feel that the system is overloaded is because so many issues are being set aside for another date, simply because the defense lawyers and Crown haven't had time to get all the information together that they require. Now, I assume that that's the lack of manpower. I could be totally wrong, but that is my observations from 9 different sessions.
Si on revient au niveau de l'enquête de la GRC, parce qu'on sait que
If we come back to the RCMP investigation, the RCMP took your statement, made the investigation. Did you feel that their work was effective?
They had these 2 culprits caught within, I believe, 3 days. They were able to, through fingerprints and whatnot, identify them quite readily because these 2 individuals had other records, so to speak. So I felt that the RCMP worked quite fast on this one.
Thank you,
Merci. Thank you,
Mr.
sir.
Paulus. Madame Sahot, 5 minutes to finish it off.
Thank you. I definitely sympathize with you, Mr. Presley White. I think that's a horrible incident that you had to go through, and you're suffering, physically from that as a result. I also hear about a lot of incidences of property theft, a lot including violence, and even my riding, which is a more urban riding in Brampton, and a lack of police response where no one comes for days on end because it is just property crime. Do you feel in the rural areas that there's a lack of interest because it is property crime? But I mean, in your case, the RCMP did respond, but we heard from a few other cases that response times are low. We're facing similar issues in the urban areas when it comes to this too. What's your opinion on that?
Yes, I think all of us in rural area feel that the RCMP do a commendable job based on the staffing that they have. They have to kind of pick and choose a little bit as well. They're not going to come and issue me with a warrant for driving 15 miles an hour or 15 kilometers an hour over the speed limit when they have to be investigating a serious rural crime like I was involved in. There's only so many of them, and they're going full out as far as I'm concerned. And they have to kind of pick and choose a little bit.
From some previous witnesses we had, we got testimony in terms of defense of property, being able to use handguns or a weapon. In your scenario, you were saying you did not have time to really go out and access anything like that. You didn't even have enough time to really call the police in that moment. So do you think that is something that can help solve the issue of rural crime in your area or not? Owning handguns, being able to use them more readily?
I would suggest that everybody in my community has a long rifle, and they know exactly where it is. And anybody that comes in and tries to beat my wife is probably going to be confronted with it. But
is it property crime?
Property. I feel that it's, again, I feel that the job is being done as accurately or as completely as it can be with the resources that are available and their time limits that they have to deal with the minor property crime.
But you do feel the resources are not enough, and maybe an increase in resources could better help alleviate some of the rural crime that's taking place?
As I indicated previously, these guys that are doing the thieving and whatnot, they are professional or semi-professional. They work so fast, they know where the police are, they know how long it's going to take them to get to the targeted location or the location that they have targeted.
I would that we hear very similar, have very similar situations in urban areas too. People are quick, they get in and they get out and they know what they're doing. I also found it very interesting that you said that not many of these robberies involve the use of long guns. So most of these crimes do not take place with a weapon involved. That's a gun. You said they use knives mostly?
Well, mostly knives are used, but the rural people are they're not paranoid. They are absolutely scared. One individual, and this happened to him at noon, for example, they drove up to his shop, they opened the door and they started unloading stuff out of his shop and whatnot, and he hollered at them from the house. They told him to get back in the house or he'd get hurt. And that's exactly what he did. He went in and phoned 911, and of course, by the time the RCMP could get there, those guys have got what they wanted and they're gone.
Since you were a city councillor, how would you define rural crime? Because that's something that I've been thinking quite a lot about in this study. How is rural crime different from crime that happens in the cities? The actual act, why is it different?
real crime, for example, in the city, they'll go and they'll steal an item essentially. They won't necessarily clean out a car, although if they know you're away, they'll go in and clean out your house. But in the rural area, they really don't care what they take as long as they got lots, because they know it is of value. They can sell it somewhere.
Okay, thank you. We're going to have to leave it there. Thank you, Ms. Soda. Before I let you go, Mr. Priestley Wright, what was the time between when your wife called and when the RCMP arrived?
I suspect maybe half an hour, a little bit longer.
And how far away do you live from the detachment?
70 kilometers.
70 kilometers.
Correct.
Okay. Well, I thank you on behalf of the committee for sharing your story. It certainly is horrific, and we're glad to see you on the amend, and we hope that the amend continues. Dr. Coutier, you've been a familiar witness to this committee, and thank you for your testimony as well. With that, we're going to suspend, before we impanel our other witnesses, we had an agreement that we would go in camera, discuss a little bit of committee business, and then re-impanel and call the witnesses. Is that the will of the committee? We still want to proceed that way? Okay. So this meeting is now in camera, and I'd ask those who are...
Just 1 second.
Oh, I got a 1 second here to go off. Okay, we need 30 seconds for the televisions to shut down. Take their seats, and I'm told that we're connected by television. I just don't see a picture.
Teleconference.
Teleconference. Oh, it's teleconference. I'm sorry. Okay. Okay. So, is Mr. Larson there?
Yes, I am.
Excellent. Okay. So we know that Mr. Larson's here, and we know that Mr. Drummond is here, and we know that Mr. Friedman is here. So now that all the handshakes have been taking place, could I ask Mr. Larson, could you lead off with your first 10-minute statement, please?
I will do, sir.
Thank you.
Good afternoon. My name is Dale Larson. I'm currently Assistant Deputy Minister, Policing and Community Safety Services with the Ministry of Corrections and Policing, Government of Saskatchewan. I began my career with the ministry in 2013, and prior to that, I was Chief of Police, Moose Jaw Police Service. And I'm joined by Corey Leroy, currently an Executive Director with Police Quality and Innovations, and also responsible for the CSO Peacekeeper Program and First Nations Policing in our department. Corey's police history was with the RCMP. He retired as an inspector with 30 years experience. In 2012, the Saskatchewan Urban Municipalities Association and Saskatchewan Association of Rural Municipalities informed the Ministry of Corrections and Policing that their policing resources were insufficient to adequately address their community safety needs. primarily those high-priority, low-risk to harm policing calls in their communities, such as enforcing traffic safety, alcohol infractions, and crime prevention initiatives. Police leaders have known for many years, and research has verified, that the majority of calls for assistance that police officers attend are non-criminal in nature. In fact, upwards of 80% of that police demand is non-criminal. A large percentage of these calls, even though high priority, are low risk to harm from an officer safety perspective. Calls such as traffic complaints and collisions, bylaw infractions, not in progress reports of minor thefts and mischief, and crime prevention initiatives that do not require the attendance of an armed, fully trained police officer. With this in mind, the CSO Peacekeeper model is meant to offer municipalities, rural municipalities, and First Nations an additional option to support and enhance current policing services within their boundaries and increase crime prevention initiatives at the community level. The alternate enforcement model was developed in collaboration with SARM, SUMA, RCMP, Saskatchewan Association of Chiefs of Police, Saskatchewan Federation of Police Officers, and the Ministry. It was important to work with stakeholders not only in consultation, but in program design and implementation. The development of the CSO program began in April of 2013 with a literature review to examine models of delivering a low risk for harm policing model to enhance and support the policing services provided by existing municipal, RCMP, and First Nations police services. The review examined low risk for harm policing programs based on models from the United Kingdom, United States, and Canada, and in particular the province of Alberta and their peace officer program. From the review, a model defined as a provincial program within current community policing strategies evolved, providing an opportunity to enhance community safety and crime prevention through building partnerships with community stakeholders, focusing on crime prevention and intervention as well as low-risk suppression was the objective and became known as the Community Safety Officer Peacekeeper Program. The literature review also outlined a structure based on 4 areas: functions, governance, training and competency, and an evaluation and outcomes area. From concept to reality, the City of North Battleford, population 13,567 residents, a Saskatchewan city with one of the highest crime severity indexes in the nation, was chosen as the proof of concept site for the CSO program. The Community Safety Officer program launched in North Battleford in 2014. Today, the program employs 6 officers and is an integral part of the city's community safety strategy. Even though community safety officers are distinct and separate from regular police officers, they are considered to be a vital element in support of the Battleford's RCMP detachment. The Ministry discovered early on that the partnership between CSOs and the police agency of jurisdiction is absolutely critical to the success of the CSO program. F Division RCMP Assistant Commissioner Curtis Zablocki provided support for the program, commenting that by expanding the CSO's authority to take on some lower-level investigations, the RCMP will be able to target more serious criminal activity. North Battleford recently reported that year-to-date, their Community Safety Officer unit has dealt with 6,105 calls for service and has issued over 3,300 citations for different offenses in their city. Another early success of the program was in Edenwald, Saskatchewan. In an attempt to reduce their rural crime problems, the rural municipality of Edenwald, a small rural municipality of 233 residents, was also an early participator of the CSO program. Edenwald has found that their CSOs not only deter theft, but also help prevent road damage through the enforcement of overweight vehicles. The RM of Edenwald now contracts out the services of their CSOs to 3 other neighboring rural communities. The CSO Peacekeeper Training Program. The Saskatchewan CSO Peacekeeper Induction Course is the minimum training requirement for issuance of a special constable appointment and is delivered through an MOU between the Ministry and Saskatchewan Polytechnique for the delivery of the 6-week induction training consisting of 4 weeks in class and 2 weeks online. There are some exemptions from the induction course that are considered on a case-by-case basis and must be approved in writing by my office. The CSOs, once trained, are authorized to carry the following intermediate weapons and restraint device: OC spray, baton, and handcuffs. CSOs peacekeepers do not carry firearms. CSO peacekeepers are also provided their boundaries relative to low risk to harm limitations of their authority. Traffic enforcement and activities are not allowed on highways within their jurisdictions that have posted speeds above 90 kilometers an hour. They do not attend or participate in any way with occurrences where weapons are suspected. If CSOs encounter an assault or other potentially violent event in progress, they contact the local police service. Likewise, if impaired driving offense are detected, they contact the local police agency as well. CSO peacekeepers are not authorized to engage in motor vehicle pursuits. Authorities, upon successful completion of the CSO Peacekeeper training program, they are provided authorities under several provincial statutes as well as enhanced authorities to attend not in progress criminal code property offenses of theft under $5,000 and mischief for the sole purpose of receiving information, evaluating, and liaising with the local police of jurisdiction as required, as well as non-injury motor vehicle collisions within their jurisdictional boundaries. Their appointment also includes the authority and powers of peace officers under the provisions of the Criminal Code relating to the service of summonses, subpoenas, and legal documents. Program reviews in July of 2017, an evaluation of the Community Safety Officer induction course was completed, and more recently, in August of 2018, a complete CSO program evaluation was delivered, and these recommendations are still moving forward. In the spring of 2018, as part of the Rural Crime Strategy, the Minister hired one full-time staff position dedicated solely to the CSO Peacekeeper program and to implement the recommendations from the two reviews. Discipline and public complaints. The CSOs, peacekeepers, are directly employed by the municipality, rural municipality, or First Nation, providing employers control over the schedule and deployment of their CSO peacekeepers within the geographic boundaries pursuant to their special constable appointments.
Mr. Larson, you have a minute and a half. Sorry to interrupt your presentation.
No problem. I'm just going to skip ahead then to our final couple pages in relation to a more direct discussion about First Nations. In Saskatchewan, we have 70 First Nation communities, 51 of which fall under the First Nations policing program, one self-administered First Nation police agency covering 5 First Nations and 46 First Nations that fall under the CTAs. Those receive policing services provided by the RCMP under the Federal Provincial First Nation Policing Program, funded 52% Canada and 48% province. Total for the province of Saskatchewan in funding, federal and provincial, is closing in on $22 million annually. As mentioned in a federal terms and conditions guideline for funding for First Nations and Inuit policing document, we should look at innovative approaches to police service delivery in First Nations or Inuit communities. With this in mind, our team is working with Public Safety Canada to explore ways of fitting the CSO Peacekeepers program into that funding model. Recently, a pilot project was undertaken to facilitate the training in the communities of Pelican Narrows and Little Pine Poundmaker First Nation. In September 2018, Peacekeeper training started on Peter Ballantyne Cree Nation in Pelican Narrows. October.
Can you wind up your remarks, Mr. Larson? I'm sorry to be running the clock here.
I sure will. It is anticipated that by the end of 2018 calendar year, Saskatchewan will have 77 trained community safety officer peacekeepers working in the province. In closing, the Community Safety Officer Peacekeeper program provides municipalities and First Nation communities an affordable and effective option to enhance local community safety and support, not replace those police agencies of jurisdiction. It has been our pleasure to share the Saskatchewan Community Safety Officer Peacekeeper Community Safety Program with you today, and we are open to any questions you may have.
Thank you, Mr. Larson. Dr. Drummond. welcome back to the committee.
Yeah, thank you so much. I'm really not sure why I'm here, but there must be a
the
reason.
rest of us as well.
And I'll try and just re-emphasize some points that I made in May or June of last year or this year. Rather than considering myself an expert in the field of firearms violence, which I am not, following 35 years in rural practice as both a family physician and emergency physician and a coroner, I feel I can bear some degree of witness to the issue of firearms accessibility and rural death. Prior to beginning in rural practice in Perth, Ontario, just south of here, I have lived in Montreal, Ottawa, and Vancouver and served 3 years of active service in the Canadian military. And during that time, I rarely encountered a firearm injury or death. Being a rural emergency physician, however, and as a coroner, I've seen more than my share of firearm injuries and death by long gun suicide. Of the 3 murders in Perth during my 35-year tenure in Perth, I've been involved in 2 of them. I don't know why I'm the lucky soul, including the difficult experience of investigating a double murder-suicide by long gun as a consequence of intimate partner violence. That is a memory that 25 years later still stays with me to this day, and it reminds me constantly of the need to prevent firearms access for those who shouldn't have them. I should note that we consider, as an emergency physicians group, the issue of the public's health an entirely nonpartisan issue. This may explain why I, as a rural licensed gun owner and a member of the Conservative Party, view the issue of prevention of firearms misuse and injury equally through a nonpartisan lens. It just isn't partisan for me. I'm not an anti-gun guy. As a member of the Canadian Association of Emergency Physicians, this will be my 4th appearance before a committee dating back to when Warren Almond was the chair back in 1994. That probably makes me an old guy.
Well, yeah, I was probably still here. Yeah.
Well, that makes you an old guy too, then.
Unregrettably true.
I know. As a rural physician, and more specifically as a coroner, I have marveled at the absolute disconnect between public discourse on gun control, with its seeming single-minded focus on illegal handguns, gun-related crime, gang violence, and homicide, and my reality on the ground of suicide by legally owned long guns. Such a focus on crime has, in my view, prevented us from a very real opportunity to reduce firearm death and disability that is associated with suicide and its prevention. 80% of all firearm fatalities in Canada are due to suicide. In rural Lanark County, just south of Ottawa, where I live and practice, gun crime is practically unheard of. However, suicide by long gun is not at all uncommon. This is where this government and those that follow it must focus their efforts. Reducing accessibility to firearms, particularly those at risk of self-harm or intimate partner violence, is where we need to focus our attention, in my view. It will obviously not solve the problem, which is complex and multifactorial, but it will be a small but important step in the right direction of reducing the tragic legacy of death by suicide. I've presented in June or May. I'm not going to go through that again. You've got all the data from StatsCan, I am sure. What our association would call for is greater research. I mean, StatsCan's great, but I think it would be great to have actual research in terms of how guns are used, both in terms of suicide, intimate partner violence, and homicide, so that we can sort of focus our efforts on getting a bang for our buck. That sounds awful, but in terms of appropriate action in terms of reducing firearms access and death. We believe that there needs to be much more rigorous screening of those individuals at risk, and we believe that physicians should play an important role by incorporating the well-established practice of reporting those individuals at risk. We do it for flying, we do it for driving, we do it for people that have shown a tendency towards child abuse. Why not guns? There may be no clear subset of people where these efforts can be identified and focused, but I think we can all agree that the actively psychotic individual with paranoid delusions who wants to murder the government of Canada probably shouldn't own a gun. I think we can agree that somebody who's involved in intimate partner violence should not have access to a gun. And that's where I think that we as a profession and we as a society need to make that small but important step in mandatory reporting of individuals at risk. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Drummond. Mr. Friedman, 10 minutes, please.
Yes, thank you very much. Good afternoon, Mr. Chair, Vice Chairs, committee members. Thank you for inviting me to address you today. It's always a pleasure to appear before this committee. Unlike my last appearance, I appear today as an individual in my personal capacity as a criminal defense lawyer. Although my practice is based here in Ottawa, I regularly defend clients and try cases throughout the East Region. My work often takes me through small towns and villages, from Stormont, Dundas, and Glengarry in the east to Renfrew and Lanark County, like Dr. Drummond in the west, and all places in between. I have seen firsthand the unique challenges faced by rural residents as both victims of crime and all too often the subject of criminal charges themselves. I found last week's testimony by Edward and Jessica Maurice to ring particularly true in this regard. Their story, sadly, is one that I have heard many times before. Rural residents confront intruders on their property. Sometimes the intruders are armed themselves. Invariably, when seconds count, the police are only minutes away. Like the Maurices, they are faced with an awful decision: act in self-defense or risk unimaginable consequences. At the outset, I should distinguish between two entirely separate concepts. There is an obvious difference between vigilantism, which is a crime, and the act of self-defense, which is a long-recognized right in both the common law and the criminal code. To be a vigilante is to act unlawfully, to seek retribution or vengeance for real or perceived wrongs. It is to take the law into one's own hands. It is antithetical to the rule of law in a free and democratic society. It should be discouraged and punished by the criminal justice system. Self-defense, on the other hand, is something else entirely. For as long as the modern common law has existed, the right of individuals to use proportional and reasonable force in repelling unlawful threats has been recognized and protected. It is enshrined in our criminal law. It has often been my experience, however, that it is the property owners acting in self-defense who are themselves the subject of criminal charges. In the end, many of those clients are ultimately acquitted, or, like Eddie Maurice, have their charges withdrawn before trial. But this is little consolation. By that point, they have been arrested, charged, and often placed on strict bail conditions. Some don't get bail at all and must await their trials in custody. These arrests are highly publicized. In the internet age, I often tell clients that it is not the criminal record that should be most feared, but the Google record. Web searches by neighbors, prospective employers, and others turn up the news and social media stories about their arrests and alleged wrongdoing. Then, of course, there is the expense. In Canada, notwithstanding one's ultimate vindication, there is little one can do to recover legal fees expended to defend against even the most baseless criminal charges. As my clients often realize, much as the Maurices did, the process is often punishment itself. So what can be done to rectify this? In my view, the starting point is the current self-defense provisions in the Criminal Code. To be clear, these sections were recently amended and consolidated by the previous government in 2012. It was a long time coming. In fact, as far back as 1995, the Supreme Court stated that, quote, legislative action is required to clarify the Criminal Code's self-defense regime. Indeed, the former provisions were criticized by that court as being highly technical, excessively detailed, and internally inconsistent. But there is more to be done, particularly in light of over 5 years' experience about how even the new provisions are being interpreted and applied by police and prosecutors. Canadians deserve consistency and predictability in the application of the criminal law. More importantly, it is fundamental to the rule of law that the boundary between illegal action and legal self-defense be clear to all. I offer for this committee's consideration a number of practical steps that can be taken to further clarify the Criminal Code self-defense provisions. First, Parliament should consider codifying the existing common law self-defense principles in the Criminal Code. While these may not change the ultimate outcome where a case goes to trial, of course, a judge knows the law and will instruct the jury accordingly, it would give clear guidance to law enforcement when they are considering the threshold question of whether or not to lay the charge. That is, whether reasonable and probable grounds exist to believe that an offense has been committed. These recognized common law principles include the following. 1. The accused bears no onus to demonstrate that there was no reasonable way of withdrawing or retreating. From Ward, the Ontario Court of Appeal. 2. People in stressful and dangerous situations do not have time for subtle reflection. Mohammed from the Ontario Court of Appeal. 3. A person defending himself against an attack, reasonably apprehended, cannot be expected to weigh to a nicety the exact measure of necessary defensive action. From Baxter, Ontario Court of Appeal. And 4, what is relevant to assessing a claim of self-defense is how the accused perceived the relevant facts and whether the perception was reasonable. In other words, an accused person is entitled to be mistaken, so long as that mistake was a reasonable one, from Patel, Supreme Court of Canada. Next, Parliament should consider an amendment to the code that would clarify the circumstances in which an accused person would not bear the burden of establishing the evidentiary basis for a claim of self-defense. At present, in order for a court to consider a claim of self-defense, the judge must find that there is a, quote, air of reality to the defense. In other words, that the possibility exists in the evidence. While this does not formally shift the burden of proof to the accused, that is often the practical effect. Once this air of reality is met, the Crown must disprove the claim of self-defense beyond a reasonable doubt. I would recommend an amendment to the code establishing that the air of reality is automatically met where the accused is on his or her own property and the victim is trespassing or otherwise unlawfully there. Finally, I would propose a wholesale streamlining of the existing self-defense provisions. We can look to other jurisdictions for guidance. For example, in New Zealand, the law is phrased as follows: everyone is justified in using, in the defense of himself or herself or another, such force as in the circumstances as he or she believes them to be, it is reasonable to use. I conclude with this thought. Rural victims of crime should not find themselves twice victimized, once by criminals and again by the criminal justice system. Much can be done to ensure fairness in how the criminal code is applied and enforced, and to restore the bond of trust between rural Canadians, law enforcement, and the courts. Thank you very much for your kind attention.
Thank you, Mr. Frieden. Ms. DeBruzen, 7 minutes, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And my questions, I wanted to start with the Assistant Deputy Minister, Dale Larson. And I'm sorry, I missed the name of the other person who's with you. You mentioned it was Corey
Lara.
Okay. Thank you to both of you. Because you raised some issues about how you're addressing rural crime, but I wanted to pull it back a little bit. I was looking at some stuff from Statistics Canada, and it seemed to indicate that Saskatchewan might have slightly different issues as to rural crime than some of the other prairie provinces. In one, it referred to Manitoba and Saskatchewan as having high rates of rural crime that were the results of higher rates of all types of crime, violent, property, and other crime. Alberta was largely due to property crime. And then there was another StatsCan study that referred to the crime severity index being much higher in Saskatchewan than in the other two provinces. I was just wondering maybe if you could comment on that, if you have any information about why that might be, and just maybe that might help me understand a little bit more.
I noted as well that that property crime comment or determination that was in StatsCan publication in relation to Alberta as well. The crime severity index and crime rate, as you probably realize, are two separate things. And with our population and some of the violent crime that we experience both in Saskatchewan and Manitoba, it pushes that crime index into a higher component. So just the regular crime severity index in itself includes both property and violent persons crime. So it's difficult to compare one to the other. In relation to our property crime, we're seeing a bit of a downtrend right now, but it is on the high side for a property crime rate perspective as well.
And do you have any statistics within Saskatchewan as to whether there is a difference in say, the severity of crime or the types of crime in your urban areas versus your rural areas?
Surprisingly, Regina and Saskatoon, the bigger urban municipalities in the province, have close crime severity index to the overall provincial number. The example that we provided of North Battleford, their crime severity index is probably in the neighborhood of twice the number of Saskatoon or Regina.
And have you done any research or examination as to why that might be?
You know, some of it I think is based on the formula itself. In a city of North Battleford of 13,000 population, and trying to equate that to a rate that's derived from per 100,000 population is sometimes skews some of the data, but we've looked into some of the, I guess, more or less the actual crimes and the rate that drives them as opposed to the crime severity index, and always are trying to deal with those violent crime areas. And currently North Battleford has experienced a bit of a drop, but it's not substantial enough by far, that's for sure, from our perspective.
Okay, I'm running out of time, and I just wanted to kind of jump in because in Alberta, we've been talking a little bit about a project that was taken on by the provincial government where $8 million was invested in policing, created some different ways of community. It seemed like developing community links and building out, and it was actually having an impact on reducing property crime, according to a 6-month report. So 6 months in, that was what they had seen. I don't know if you've had a chance to look at the what's been happening in Alberta, and is there anything similar as to the way you're doing things in Saskatchewan?
Yes to both of those. I think what you might be referring to is the crime reduction teams that Alberta implemented with approximately $8 to $10 million funding last year. And right. I think they have 4 in place right now. We currently have our second one just was fully manned about a month ago, and you're right. They're showing some interesting numbers in relation to not only property but violent crime as well, downturn numbers.
Is that the same thing as when you were talking about the CSO thing? Is that tied to that similar type of a program, or are these different programs?
No, the crime reduction teams are full police officer positions, and in this province, we currently have just the RCMP positions engaged in those, and we're looking towards municipal blend as well, but we haven't got there yet.
All right. And any other thing that came up when we were talking last week was there was a reference to something called Alberta Sheriffs. Is there anything similar to that in Saskatchewan?
Not as of yet. The Alberta Sheriffs do not only highway patrol and enforcement, but they also do prisoner transport and court security. We're separate a bit in relation to our court security and prisoner transport units that fall under our Attorney General side of the ministry. The peace officer program that Alberta currently has was kind of the model that we looked at in relation to our community safety officer program that we're implementing.
Perfect. I have less than a minute, so just quickly, do you have response time statistics for your province, and do you have them broken down by urban and rural areas?
We have looked at those recently because of our PRT program, our protection response team, but we don't, at the push of a button, I couldn't get them from the larger municipal agencies right now.
Right. But do you have some type of a calculation as to what the average response time is in rural parts of Saskatchewan? Is there an average time?
To some degree, but I don't have an average number for you.
All right. Would you be able to provide that to us at a later date?
We would have to check with F Division, our provincial police service of jurisdiction, and see if they could provide us with something.
Thank you, Ms. DeBruzen. Thank you, Mr. Larson. Mr. Mott, 7 minutes, please. Before Mr. Mott starts, I'm looking at the clock. It's past 10 after. By the time I do one 7-minute round, it's close to done. Is there any appetite to extend, given that we did have committee business in between the two? Do you want to do another 2 5 minutes, for instance, after? Are you good with that? Yep. Okay. So we'll do the finish off the 7-minute round, do 2 5s, 1 Liberal, 1 Conservative. Okay. Mr. Mott, 7 minutes, please.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, all the witnesses for here. And Dale, it's Glenn Motts from Medicine Hat, MHPS. You remember, congratulations on your appointment. I haven't had a chance to talk to you since then.
Thanks, Glenn.
Mr. Solomon Friedman, I'm going to ask you first. You had mentioned in your comments that the process is the punishment, specific to self-defense. Now, could you elaborate on that idea that just because an individual is entitled to claim self-defense is a legal justification, that they may be still subject to significant barriers in accessing justice? Can you explain that a little further?
Sure. So we have to distinguish between somebody being ultimately charged with an offense and then someone being convicted. In my experience, I've seen many cases where individuals are charged, but then the charge is withdrawn or they're acquitted after a trial. The threshold to lay a charge is reasonable and probable grounds. And particularly in a province like Ontario, where there's no initial charge screening by the prosecutor, that is, charges don't have to be approved, I should say, by the prosecutor, you're relying on the policing policy and the sort of individual knowledge and experience of the first officer to respond to a scene. And particularly where a firearm is used or where there has been a violent incident, often I have seen that the first instinct of the officer is to lay a charge and then say, we'll let the court sort it out. The trouble with that, of course, is, like I said, the process is the punishment. This means a person is going to have their liberty restricted, sometimes by being placed in custody, mind you, strict bail conditions, and an incredible expense, not to mention the stigma that's associated with having criminal charges hang over your head. So it begins on the ground level, and it doesn't matter whether you're acquitted or vindicated. Clients always say, no one remembers that follow-up small print story at the end of the day. People remember the front page news when you were paraded off in handcuffs for exercising your right to self-defense.
Thank you for those comments. And I guess that plays into what I want to ask you next, sir, is that you explained some of them. Like the self-defense jurisprudence is quite clear. You know, I think in R versus Bengay, the court found that the court must be alive to the fact that the people in stressful and dangerous situations do not have time for subtle reflection. And you also mentioned the SEC decision in R versus Patel. To me, these decisions sometimes skewers heavily in favor of a protection of self-defense rights. Now, do you feel that the state of the law in the courts is effectively communicated to law enforcement to aid in their discharging decisions? And you indicated that it wasn't. So how do we address the issue? How do we best deal with it?
I think there are two ways to do it. One is to ensure that frontline officers receive a bare minimum of legal education when it comes to self-defense. Now, we're not expecting police officers. I've encountered many police officers who are law graduates, who do have law degrees, but the vast majority do not. And you can't burden every police officer with having to carry around the criminal reports for the past 100 years. What you can do, however, is number one, have a change in policy that reflects training in these areas. And the second thing to do is remember what police officers do often refer to, and that is the criminal code. So very often police officers will open the criminal code as a reference point. And if these principles are only in the common law, now they're equally as binding as if they were in the criminal code, but they're just not accessible. So to me, an easy answer to this is to say, take the common law that already governs the courts. That's why we see so many acquittals, but so many charges as well, and import those into the criminal code and let the police officer say, hey, you don't need to weigh the niceties of your actions. Or, hey, you're entitled to be mistaken. And you don't need a law degree to know that. I can just read it in the criminal code.
Fair enough. Now, to speak to your comments about the need for the charges to self-defense laws to aid police in making charge decisions, is it more likely that someone who defends themselves and their property is charged by the police currently, or does that depend on the circumstances entirely?
I mean, there are two separate provisions, one for the defense of persons where broader authority is granted, but I've encountered police officers who didn't know that you actually have a right to defend your property. And in fact, the criminal code sets out a three-part test for when you have the right to defend property. So if you believe on reasonable grounds that another person either has entered your property or is about to enter your property, and that act of entering your property constitutes an offense, you are permitted to use reasonable force in the circumstances. I've had police officers tell me in cross-examination, when I'm asking them as to why a charge was laid, they said, well, they weren't defending a person. They were defending their property. But what they don't get to is the last part of the provision that says, as long as the act is reasonable in the circumstances, then defense of property is permitted. So in my view, police need to be better educated that it's not just a defense of persons. Equally, there's a defense of property provision that has its own rules but has binding effect.
So, when we look at the whole area of real crime, this is not a gun debate. This is a real crime debate, and as we know that a lot of real crime does not involve firearms. So, with that in mind, but some do. So, from your perspective, what do you think is probably the most effective change any government can do to have a positive impact on public safety in rural Canada, on rural crime?
because
in
I'm-
all aspects, from what Dr. Drummond said,
Yeah.
and what our witnesses who've experienced this. What is the most, from your perspective, how can we make that happen?
And because I'm greedy, I'm going to give you two changes. On a provincial, that is the federal government showing a leadership role and influencing the provinces to follow suit. And I agree with Dr. Drummond, this is not a political issue, right? This is a policy, a fact, and a legal issue. In my view, number one, there needs to be reform to the self-defense provisions so the code as it's written reflects the common law. Those are pretty simple legislative amendments. The Supreme Court's been calling for them since 1995. Now, the last government tried. It added in a number of factors, but police simply are not applying them the way, in my view, they ought to. That's number one. Number two, the federal government can show leadership on the RCMP level by implementing policy for, now mind you, we all know that the RCMP is actually the rural police force for the majority of this country that do not have provincial police forces in those places where there are not municipal police forces. So the federal government can show leadership by having a policy to allow first responders, police officers, to know the test for self-defense and apply it in the way the criminal code intended. And what I would hope to see is to see the provincial attorneys general follow suit when it comes to the Crown policy and when it comes to their own provincial and municipal police forces.
Thank you, Mr. Mott. Madame Moore, 7 minutes.
Merci beaucoup. My comment will be. I will speak in English by the time you put here. Okay. My first one is about drunk driving. There is a lot of drunk driving in rural area often because there is no other way to get back home. So it's really problematic. Like I work in an emergency department in a small rural area where we had someone that was so drunk that I think he had 2 times the limit of potential mortal alcohol in his blood, and we had to intube him because he was not able to breathe anymore by himself, and he was like driving 30 minutes before. So can you comment on alcohol, drunk driving in rural area, if it's something that you've seen often, because often like police officer bring those people to the hospital to have the legal blood sample. And the other one is, do you think health professional, including also nurse, know and think about like talking to the legal authority about like someone that have potential mental disease or a mental condition that will maybe need that firearm will be taken away for a few time, or a major part of health professionals just don't know where to call or do not think about doing it.
Thanks. I dispute your comment and about there is no other choice. Of course, there's a choice, and there is no excuse for drinking and driving, no matter what the rurality index is of your given community. It does. I'm going to try and focus on firearms because that's why I thought I was here, but it does raise the issue that when we encounter somebody who has been drinking and driving and has either come to our emergency department or been brought to our emergency department in Ontario and probably every other province in this country, we have a legal obligation, a mandatory obligation to report that individual as somebody who may be unsafe to drive, because if they drink and drive, then they could do it again. So there's a mandatory reporting provision, which on pain of death, if we don't do it, gets us into a lot of trouble. By the same token, we do encounter people quite often in the emergency department who are thinking about suicide or ruminating about suicide. And in practically every rural home, there's a firearm. Not every rural home, but a significant number of them. And so when somebody comes in with suicidal ideation or thoughts of suicide or significant depression, you know, it should be part of our process. It isn't actually, but it should be, to ask about the presence of guns in the home. And to make sure that during that period of severe depression or suicidal thoughts, that they don't have access to a weapon. Currently, we don't have the legal right to notify the police that somebody who is presented with suicidal thoughts has a weapon in their home. So that is something that we need to resolve, I think. I understand that there are concerns about, the confidentiality process and the fact that medicine is based on the ability to freely discuss items of concern with a physician without fear of government reporting, but that is a fact. With respect to, and I think your second point was with respect to, I'm sorry?
Est-ce que les professionnels, est-ce que les professionnels de la santé,
Do health professionals have the reflex of thinking, well, there's a hotline that we can call? Do you think they're in the habit of thinking of that? Because sometimes someone arrives at the emergency, they go through triage, they tell them about what their issue is, and then they decide that it's taking too long and they go back home. So only the nurse, the triage nurse, saw them. So do nurses understand that that's their role? Or do they tend to think that it's actually up to the doctor?
That question. Clearly, we as physicians, emergency nurses, but particularly emergency physicians, have a societal obligation to report individuals who may be a danger to themselves or others. There may not be any legal mechanism by which we can call a police department to say we have a drunk driver in our department and he's leaving. But I can tell you that if I had a drunk driver in my department who left, I would call the police. And I would take my chances with my colleague, the lawyer.
Monsieur Solomon,
Mr. Solomon?
Call the police as a nurse because I'm worried about someone leaving the emergency department because he's totally drunk or because I think he could commit someone with firearm. Could I have a charge laid out against me because I call the police to say that?
Well, it depends on what type of charge we're talking about. You certainly couldn't have a criminal charge laid against you. I'm not a doctor so I don't specialize in professional misconduct, but I know a little bit about the colleges, both for nurses and physicians that have their confidentiality rules. What I can tell you is from the criminal perspective and the firearms control scheme, and I don't think I differ with Dr. Drummond on this, there is a reporting mechanism for everybody. It's a phone number, 1-800-731-4000. You can call the RCMP at any time to report a public safety complaint with respect to firearms. It's on the RCMP Canadian Firearms Program website. It's well publicized in gun stores all over the country. That's something that I see. I see the results of that, people using it, and individuals do have their firearms seized and are held until a hearing can take place to determine their suitability to own firearms. I think that's a perfectly appropriate process.
D'accord. Donc, par exemple, je sais qu'au Québec, c'est...
For example, I know that in Quebec, it's a little more difficult to tell the police about someone who may be inebriated. As a nurse, I was told that unless I could prove that there was imminent danger, I could find myself in hot water. So we had a bit of a code with local police. The code was, can you bring me a coffee, park in front of the building, park next to the red car? Do you think that it's excessive that health professionals have to use such a system when they only want to protect society?
Because a lawyer with my confidentiality obligations, I'm protected by the only existing professional client privilege, not confidentiality. I'm bound by privilege, solicitor-client privilege. And that privilege is waived in the face of an imminent threat to an identifiable person. I am then relieved of that privilege. So to me, as a lawyer, we know, everyone thinks their privilege or confidentiality is the most important, but mine is actually recognized as the most important constitutionally. But I'm still relieved of it. I certainly wouldn't see why, if there's an imminent threat to an identifiable person, why a professional confidentiality wouldn't be waived.
Thank you, Ms. Moore. We really are running behind. Mr. Spingman, 7 minutes, please.
Sure, thank you very much. My first question is to Mr. Larson and Mr. Friedman. The motion that gave rise to the study is entitled Rural Crime in Canada, not Crime in Rural Canada. and I'm asking if this is a semantic distinction or if there's actually something that we may be inadvertently creating as a classification that doesn't actually warrant that classification. Should we be talking about crime in rural Canada, given that we have a common constitutional framework, a common criminal code, a common set of federal-provincial relationships? Are these just different allocations of resources and deployments, or is there actually something that warrants the title rural crime as distinct from urban crime?
I'm going to answer that first. You asked,
Sure. Yeah, and then I'd like to get Mr. Larson's views as well.
Yeah, obviously I didn't title the motion. I just where I was asked to. But what I'd say is, I which is generally what council does. Someone tells us to go somewhere, we go somewhere and speak. There is a difference in the nature that I see of offenses and victims in rural Canada. And I think that they both face different challenges. Just like the prosecution and the investigation of offenses is different in rural and urban Canada. You're right, there's one criminal code, there's one constitution, but you speak to a police officer who spent his or her entire career in a rural area versus an urban area, they'll have very different experiences. So I do think it is valuable to commit resources to trying to understand the distinction and ensure that we have a uniform, safe environment, whether you're in rural or urban Canada.
Thank you very much. Mr. Larson, views on this?
I would echo some of what was just mentioned. I'm assuming you're talking about Dr. Riddell's book. Some of the challenges, obviously, in the rural setting for police officers are quite a bit different than a metropolitan, larger urban area, and largely because of the nature of their deployment. They're usually single-man officer units, and backup for them could be some time period away, as well as that distance issue in relation to rural crime is always a challenge. And we realize that we can't put a police officer on every section of land, so going that direction with more policing isn't necessarily the best way or the most effective way to try to deal with this problem. But we have to engage rural communities on a wider scale, such as Rural Crime Watch that's we're expanding in Saskatchewan, and those types of different initiatives. Some of the technology that's available out for tracking and monitoring farmyards is something we're exploring as well.
Okay. Thanks very much for that. I note that the motion itself does not mention firearms, and I want to maintain that lens for my next question to Mr. Friedman. Mr. Friedman, Canadians who are listening to the testimony that you gave on the codification of the common law with respect to self-defense may find themselves thinking about Florida's law, which is the Stand Your Ground law. Are you familiar with that piece of legislation? And if so, how does that compare to what you're proposing to the committee today?
I'm familiar with it, as familiar as I am with a piece of foreign legislation that doesn't apply in Canada. That comes from a different, both constitutional and criminal law framework. Nothing that I've proposed has anything to do with a, quote, stand your ground law. I think stand your ground law in general is often misunderstood. I've had prosecutors say, well, what you're talking about is stand your ground, and then the judge acquits my client on the self-defense provision. So what we're talking about is recognizing that you don't have to perform an exact mathematical calculus as to the reasonableness of your force. We know that these things happen in stressful situations, and our common law recognizes that. So no, this isn't a castle. A castle doctrine is another American legal concept that does not have application here.
Nor is this a paradigm that would be limited. Maybe in practice, numerically, it would bear out, but would be limited to firearms. It could be any other use of force to stop an offense.
No, not at all. The question is whether or not the force is reasonable and proportional. And sometimes, and then it's interesting, go to firearms, sometimes we don't even talk about a discharge of firearms, right? It could just be a pointing of a firearm, which is otherwise an offense. It's a crime to point a firearm at someone, unless you're in a justified circumstance, such as self-defense. But no, we're not talking about self-defense linked exclusively to firearms.
Thank you very much for that. Mr. Larson, in the previous panel, we had evidence before the committee of a crime that had happened to Mr. Priestley Wright, with significant indications that he suffered mental trauma as a result of this attack. My question to you is, how are we doing with respect to the provision of mental health services for victims of violent crime in rural settings?
I guess I haven't seen too much movement on the victimization aspect. In Saskatchewan, we are making great strides in attending to the needs of those incidents that involve someone with mental health issues, whether it's our PACT, that's the Police and Crisis Response Team, where a police officer is partnered with a health professional. We have those both in all of our municipalities almost throughout the province. Saskatoon was the main starter of this program that's evolved to Regina, Moose Jaw, Yorkton, Prince Albert, and North Battleford eventually. We also are looking at the use of piloting a product that was recently announced in Manitoba and is used by the RCMP there, and we're trying to incorporate it here. That's the Health IM product. That's a handheld app that officers can utilize when they have someone with a mental health issue that makes the communication with the health authority or the hospital that they're attending to move things a lot quicker. That helps both the individual and the officer.
Okay. I've got 30 seconds left. A quick recommendation from your angle with respect to the root causes of crime in rural settings. Anything that you would recommend to the government on addressing root causes?
That's an answer that's probably longer than a 30-second.
Unfair, and given the time limit. Okay, thank you very much, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Spingman. Mr. Angleski.
Thank you. 5 minutes?
5 minutes, please.
Thank you. I'll start with Mr. Friedman. I want to continue on where you were with my friend here. We're talking about police and making that decision to lay a charge in the self-defense kind of situation. Do you find, and you mentioned police specifically, and I want to defend them a little bit, because do you find also that Crown Councils need to be better educated in the rules? And I like your theory here about changing the criminal code, because there's a lot of confusion there with everyone, with the police officers, with the Crown Council, and with the public.
Yeah, well, as defense counsel, I'm not going to let an opportunity to give a little jab to Crown Counsel go, right?
I thought you wouldn't.
No, of course not. And I should say at the outset, not only do I have the highest respect for the peace officers who I deal with, both in my professional capacity, sometimes as clients and sometimes as witnesses in cases, but Crown Counsel as well. But they're dealing with the tools that they have. And I'll say this about Crown Counsel. The Crowns I come up against are well-educated and they're professional and they're extremely knowledgeable in the law. However, their hands are often tied by policy. So let's go to Ontario, for example. In Ontario, the provincial Crown attorneys are governed by the Crown Policy Manual. And if you open up the Crown Policy Manual to the section entitled Firearms, you'll see that while individual Crown attorneys have wide discretion to withdraw charges, to proceed by lesser means, to divert charges for a wide variety of offenses, they do not have that same discretion for firearms. They have to get approval from either a deputy Crown attorney or the local Crown attorney or another designated Crown attorney. Even when I sit down and say, look, this is a self-defense case, what I often hear is, it's a gun case. It's going to trial, right? Which is not the case for other offenses. So I think that Crown policy is as important as police policy here in ensuring that charges that don't have a reasonable prospect of conviction or are otherwise not in the public interest, the two general hallmarks for continuing a prosecution, apply equally to firearms offenses.
Very good answer. Thank you. And I want to just stretch that just one bit. You mentioned previously pointing a firearm. And as soon as you point a firearm, everybody says it's got to go to court. Have you seen that in your experiences? Even the Crown Council, because of the policy and procedures laid down by their senior brass.
Let's just back up a moment so we're clear on the law. It is a criminal offense to point a firearm at somebody, but the comma there is without lawful excuse. Now, very often, the responding police officer doesn't want to be the one to make that determination as to whether or not there was lawful excuse. Now, sometimes there's good reason for that. I know I may advise my client, don't give a statement to police, which can't help them. But there are cases where I tell my client in those circumstances, you give your side of the story. Tell them exactly what happened. The trouble, though, is a policy one. where you have a pointing a firearm, even if there appears to be a lawful excuse, we see those winding their way through the court. So we have to recognize, of course, there are some acts where the exact same action will be unlawful in one context, but with a lawful excuse or a reasonable defense, like self-defense, will be completely lawful. The question is, does the policy recognize that distinction? And in my experience, I would say not always.
Question to Mr. Drummond. As a coroner and as a rural doctor, you spoke about suicides.
Right.
And you spoke about the long gun being used.
Yeah.
In your experience, what was the most common element that you found to suicides?
Suicides in general?
Yes.
Previous mental health issues, predominantly.
And what
Substance
type
abuse.
of method did they use? Do you find the most common?
Well, it's very clear that hanging and ligature is the most common, about 50% of time. Guns are used about 25% of suicides.
Okay, thank you. And I think I got a
little less than a minute.
Little less than a minute to Mr. Larson. You heard the evidence from Mr. Friedman about the changing of the criminal code. As a former police officer and in the role you are now, do you see a need for us to revamp that?
You're going to have to refresh my memory on the section in relation to...
The use of defense and stuff like that for property or personal, do you think that we need to clarify it and upgrade it from the current status that it is under the criminal code?
Well, I'm not sure if it needs to be upgraded or changed so much in the criminal code, but I would agree that there does seem to be a need for some clarification in relation to to help the police officer on the street make the proper decision and understand the prosecution side of it, whether that's a change to the code for reference or whether it's better training and communication with police and prosecutions.
Thank you, Mr. Glinsky. Madame Damoff, final 5 minutes.
Thank you, Chair. I didn't realize it was me. Dr. Drummond, thank you for coming. And I think you were wondering why you were here. You provided us with really valuable information when we were looking at Bill C-71 because so often there's a misperception about how firearms are used. And because so much of what we've heard in this study has been around arming people to protect their property, it seemed like it would be a valuable input to get from you on what happens when there is a firearm in the home with relation to intimate partner violence and suicide. So I wonder if you could just speak to that a little bit.
That evidence is very clear, and it is well established dating back for decades. The Americans, even though they have issues with response to the CDC being unallowed to fund gun research, the gun research continues to go on. And it's been very, very clear that keeping a gun in the home is associated with a 5-fold increase in suicide. With respect to intimate partner violence, again, about a 5-fold increase of risk of death by the mere presence of a firearm in the home. I would imagine that the Canadian Pediatric Society might be involved at some point, but they also have released a policy statement. I believe it was earlier this year, perhaps later last year. Again, a gun in the home is associated with a higher risk of pediatric accidental injury. So the mere presence of a gun, regardless of the type of gun, is associated with higher death rates for suicide, intimate partner violence, probably homicide, and certainly childhood accidents.
Thank you. Sorry, the question, based on what you were saying, and it's gone. Do you think, have you seen any increase in the number of injuries coming into the emergency room from firearms over the last few years?
No.
Or is it consistent?
The Canadian Pediatric Society highlighted that there was at least one injury per day for Ontario youth by firearm. I think they used that term kind of very loosely in the year that they studied. So, but in terms of responsible gun ownership, and I believe that the great majority of rural Canadians practice responsible gun ownership, They take safety courses, they take hunting safety courses. So we don't actually see very often an accidental injury in our emergency department. What we tend to see is myself as a coroner seeing somebody who's blown their head off with a shotgun. That's what I see more often than anything else.
One of the things that came up previously as well was comments like, well, if they don't have a firearm, they'll just use something else. And is that a reality?
No, it is not. And that's one of those great myths of the Canadian firearm debate, that if they don't have a gun, they'll find another way. And we hear that time and time again. And the truth is that it's just simply not true. If you look at of those who have survived a suicide attempt, only 10% of those remaining survivors will actually complete suicide. So it's actually, suicide is an impulsive act. Yes, there are some people who plan this meticulously and have plan A and plan B and plan C, but the great majority of people that commit suicide or attempt suicide, it's an impulsive act during a time of feeling overwhelmed. And if you can get them through their depressive episode, their suicidal episode, their psychotic episode, chances are very, very good that they will not go on to suicide. So that's a myth that needs to be debunked.
Thank you. How much time have I got left?
You got a little bit more than 30 seconds.
Maybe I'll just end it there.
Okay, well, thank you. I want to, on behalf of the committee, thank the witnesses, but before I dismiss the committee, colleagues would be interested in knowing that yesterday I was in Regina at the RCMP depot to witness my nephew, along with his colleagues in his troop, being sworn into the RCMP, and I was privileged to present him his badge. And it was, yes, exactly, very cool. And it put flesh on the bones of much of what we've been talking about for the last few days. And I'd encourage colleagues, if they have any opportunity to witness that ceremony, that they take advantage of it, because the RCMP serves our nation well. And if you want to know, and they had a map of Canada up and where every one of the graduates, where every one of the constables was going, overwhelmingly rural. Overwhelmingly places I'd never heard of. So, with that, again, I want to thank you and the help you've been to the committee. With that, we're adjourned.